Right, hello, this is a seminar on reply speeches. So the first question I'm going to ask is, why do we even have reply speeches? And on this slide you can see a few responses canvassed from different people on their opinions, most of it not fantastic. For example, they just make the debate so much longer. Reply speeches just an extra 8 minutes to start writing my OA. Or I've never heard a reply that's changed my mind on debate, and Mark Rothering once said, "The replies at this comp, fuck." So broadly speaking, replies are somewhat elusive, somewhat mysterious, and not everyone knows why they exist. So there are three broad explanations, or posited explanations, and as to why they exist. The first of which is, some people claim it's just to give first speakers something to do after they finish their speeches. That probably seems untrue, given the fact that Asian teams often make their second speaker go reply. The second potential explanation is, well, it's to rebalance the debate in favour of affirmative because they get the last say. And that might seem plausible, given most debate motions these days are bad ideas, hence why neg goes to town on AF half the time. But the problem with this explanation is neg block, which is 12 minutes of straight negative material with 8 minutes substantive and a 4 minutes reply which follows immediately afterwards, is often incredibly powerful, because one team telling you to believe them for 12 minutes straight is often more persuasive than a desperate last-ditch attempt at AF to salvage the debate in 4 minutes. So that also seems untrue. The last one is what David suggests. He goes, well, it encourages teams to be more all-rounded, so they cannot simply rely on a carry speaker. So, for example, you can't just have a super goated third speaker who wins your debate. Your first and second speaker also needs to be somewhat competent. To be clear, David's second text afterwards goes, "I still have trauma over Australs 2019 round 8 when second and reply revived the principle and won." So clearly team carries can still exist in Australs format. So why do I think replies exist? I think they exist for three broad reasons. The first of which is I think a good reply is critical in close debates. So when there are ambiguities in debate, it is often unclear as to what the judge should prioritise. There are questions which are still left hanging after all substantive speeches, and a reply can come in and fill in that gap. And in particular, they can often have the ability to change the way adjudicators view material, to see it as being more important or see things as being less important. So that is often very critical when the debates in of itself are very close and very clear. Very, very close, not clear at all. The second thing here is where a debate is not close, it makes your previous speeches seem quite good. So for example, if you explain why this key kind of piece of analysis comes out of first speaker is actually very important and actually very critical for the adjudicators' understanding of debates, that often means as a team you seem like a far stronger team, you seem like a team with just better material, which means broadly speaking your speaker points as a team also go up. So there is a sense of being able to uplift your entire team, even if maybe your reply itself doesn't necessarily get scored super highly, but it's about the perception of the case, and that's what's useful. And the last thing it does, I think, is that it also allows the debate to be viewed more holistically and for arguments to be considered. Because the reality is, often in debates, arguments get dropped, pieces of analysis get ignored, and sometimes, it's really bad material, which is why no one's responding to it, but sometimes it's very good material, and having that reply at the very end allows you to bring it back and force the adjudicator to think about, well, this got said, how should you position and situate it in a debate, and what can it do for you? So that's why I think replies do have some utility in debates. Sometimes, realistically, they won't change the outcome, but there are things which it does in the sort of like AOE sense, which makes debate kind of better. So how do you give a good reply? And it's just like, why is this not changing? This laptop isn't letting me. Oh, I got it. Yeah, okay. So just like a little practice. And so here are two other perspectives on what a reply does. And this is from a former UNSW debater back in 2018. And he goes, "I honestly don't know what's taking so long for the adjudicator to write their OA. All they needed to do is record my reply on the spot and then replay it back to us." And that, in a sense, I think is, to be honest, the way I aspire to a reply as well, right? I think my reply should be sufficiently clear. It gives you all the analysis you need in your OA. You should just repeat it, and that's why we won debate. So that is kind of my aspiration for where an reply goes, and I think this advice has stuck with me for many, many years of debating. The other thing, just what David tells Jack in the League of Legends game, is that you know that feeling when you give a banging intro, a good reply is like that, but for 4 minutes. So it's just zinger after zinger after zinger. And the reason why he says that is because replies often do need to be quite memorable for it to be effective. And I think I'll show you some examples later, but often things like the use of humor, sometimes the use of very kind of sharp and quite poignant sort of language is actually what allows the reply to even be useful. And like the same claim can be made in a worse way and it won't have the same persuasive effect. So being able to, and since you have so long to write a reply, you really do have time to kind of sit down and think about how you want to phrase things and think about how you want to say things in order to make it the most effective reply possible. So the formal stuff, what does a reply actually contain after this kind of long-winded intro? 4-minute speeches, no new material, can't be given by a third speaker, negative reply happens before after reply. So that stuff is pretty straightforward. And so what sort of skills do you want to practice when it comes to doing a good reply? I think there are broadly 4 skills which are necessary and skills which you need to train. The first of which is that you need to be very good at tracking, which is keeping detailed notes as to what was said by both teams. This is kind of the reason why I like giving a reply as a first speaker, is because after the first half, I can just basically write down word for word every single claim made by each team, every single new response made by my team, their response to those things, and I have a very good kind of picture of the holistic view of debate, which is why when it comes to adjudicating who wins what, I can sit there and basically go, well, have I won a debate or have I not won a debate? And if I haven't, what should I do? How should I maneuver around it? Which is why the ability to keep very good notes is particularly important for our replies. The second thing here is that I think you need to be very precise when you give replies, and that it is only a 4-minute speech. You do not have time to waffle around. You have to get straight to the point. Linguistic transition, yeah. So, and here's the thing, right, which is, I try my best. But the thing to be said here is there are people on the circuit, so for example, who would literally write the reply word for word and make sure that it is perfect because you have so much time to do so. And in a sense, what that allows you to do is not only like clearly you can give a speech and you're not going to stumble and you sound great, but it also gives you the time to refine your language to pack as much content into the reply in the best way possible. So being precise is very important. The third thing here is to an extent newness. Now this is counterintuitive because as I said, you can't bring in new material, but you need to be offering something new to the adjudicator. Because if you only gave the adjudicator a summary as to what has occurred in this debate, that reply does nothing. Like I've watched debate, I've written my own notes on it. You have not contributed in any way or form to my understanding of who should win this debate. You've wasted legitimately 4 minutes of my time. So that means that when you go into a reply, you should also be thinking, what am I adding? What sort of framing can I add? What sort of weighing can I add? And you need to always be thinking about how do I further this debate along and how do I develop the kind of material in this debate, even if I nominally cannot add any substantive material. And that I think probably, honestly, is the most important advice for any of you guys doing your first replies, because one of the biggest mistakes is you guys repeat the debate and it doesn't do anything, and it's like, well, to be honest, when I see like a bad reply, I just start writing my OA during the replies. So that's kind of the impact there. The last thing to note here is that you need to have a relatively good strategic instinct. So you need to know what needs to be done. So in terms of asking yourself, how on earth do I develop like a so-called strategic instinct? These are the sort of questions I often ask myself when it comes to writing a reply. The first thing here is, what is the opposition's strongest material and how do I beat that? And the reason why you ask that is because you want to take the other team at the very best, right? You're at the end of the debate. If you're going to be uncharitable and you're going to go for like low-hanging fruit in the straw man, of course you're not going to win because the judge is already crediting the far better material. So the better thing to think about it is to be brave, take their best material and go, how do I deal with this? Is this a point which stands at the end of the debate? If it stands, the only thing I can do is mitigate it and I can weigh it against our own material and explain why my material is more important. Or for example, does one of my second speakers or third speakers actually come up with a very, very good response which guts the claim? If so, I will get up and explain why this rebuttal is particularly good and defeats this claim quite squarely, which is why even if nominally speaking, it might seem important, it might seem big impact, it should not have a significant influence on the debate. The second question I asked is, what questions are likely to remain in an adjudicator's mind and how can I answer it? Because sometimes the adjudicator will just be confused, right? For example, in debate where there are contesting characterizations, one team claims the world looks like this, the other team claims the world looks like something else. How do I establish to adjudicator that you should believe my perception of the world? That is a question which often becomes unanswered in debates, and often you need to work out how to do so. And a way to do so is just like explaining very clearly, this is the two contrasting kind of characterizations. This is the structural reasons we've given you as to why our characterization is more believable. And if you believe this informs how you ought read the rest of this debate, and that is why our team gets ahead. So if there's a question, you need to answer it. And then the last thing here is, what is the simplest and quickest explanation as to why we win this debate? And that very much is for you thinking about your own material. What is our best material? What if I actually prove this probably wins us the debate? Like, for example, if you have a debate and you manage to prove an enormous harm, like this causes enormous amounts of conflict and violence, probably seems like a big impact, probably seems like if people die, we regret that. Just say, we managed to prove this is the most important thing, that's why we win. Here's what the negative team or the other team has done in response to it. It's not sufficient. You conclude like that. So these are very, very simple questions and very simple reminders to ask yourself. But the other thing to be aware of is when you're doing a reply, you should be very cognizant of where you are sitting in this debate as well. So you should have an understanding of yourself. Are we winning this debate or are we losing this debate? Because that would also determine what you try to do at reply in order to overcome it. And I'll go through that in like another slide. All right, so here are some work examples in terms of kind of things which I wanted to achieve in my speeches when I was giving a reply, and the problem I encountered. So some of these are a bit more memey than others, but like I think the first example is in round 8 of Australs 2020. We stalked the judge beforehand and he gave all 7 debates to neg, and we were apt and we were like, we're cooked. So my intro basically goes, Speaker, I know you gave all 7 of your previous debates to neg, but there's no way neg wins debate. The reason why you do that isn't necessarily to be like a bit of a dick to the adjudicator. It's actually to hang a lantern just in case there is some degree of bias where maybe this is an adjudicator who disproportionately believes things like neg blocks. Hang a lantern on it, they see it, they're far less likely to just default to a decision if that's a bias which they have. And I think this is true for many instincts, right? So for example, if a team makes a very intuitive claim, I think in the UNSW October Open Grand Final last year, I think Brendan Winters makes a claim about human nature and how awesome kind of like, why love is so important to it, but uses very abstract and fluffy words. Will Price gets up at reply and it's like, look, I do not know what any of this actually means. There is no substance behind it. Calls it out very, very clearly. And that's kind of stuff you want to do in case you think an adjudicator might actually believe another claim. The second thing here is we're winning by one higher speaks. So what the intro says here is, Speaker, in this reply, I'm going to assume that every premise of this negative team was proved to sufficiency. But let's be clear, they were not, but we're going to take them at the absolute best. So what you're starting here is acknowledging they haven't done any proof, but you're adopting the highest level of charitability, like you're still manning their argument and still explaining why you win. So at the point of that contest, obviously you win the debate and the margin should be very big because they haven't proved their arguments, and you also prove even if they had, we still have won the debate. So that's kind of like wanting to increase the margin and increasing the kind of clarity of the debate. The last one here is an example where it goes, a debate hinges on a characterization about how an average person internalizes a narrative about nihilism. And I remember in this debate, the debate team basically just goes, oh, nihilism isn't actually that bad, no one internalizes it in a bad way. So the intro just says, Speaker, the problem with the affirmative team is just too smart. They understand the philosophical nuances of nihilism because they've read Nietzsche, an average person does not. So what that does here is, it's like, well, are you just going to agree with them? Obviously not, don't dog yourself. Plausibility check for the adjudicators. This is an implausible claim. Your average ordinary adjudicator, your average ordinary person does not believe this, and hammer it in like that. So you can see here why an intro in a reply is actually incredibly important, because it sets the tone of your reply and it sets a tone of what the adjudicator themselves should find important. And this is just a few work examples. People do things differently, but that's kind of I guess like these are intros I've done and I understand the intent as to why I did them, which is why that's some examples. Okay, so in terms of how you structure a reply, there are 2 things here. The first of which you can divide it up into issues, and the other thing here you can do things is you deal with the problems of each team. The first one is the conventional approach, so you go 2 issues in this debate. Firstly, on the principle about privacy. Secondly, on is this policy effective? That's stuff like that, right? Or for example, the kind of identifying big problems is you go to town with a team and you go, there are 3 problems of this opposition team, which is why they can't win debate. You go 1, 2, and 3. And the thing I would say is that depending on where you're sitting in the debate, I will take a very different approach. So, for example, if I think we squarely are winning this debate, I take the approach where I just dog the other team and go to town on their material with obviously no new rebuttal, but explain why their material isn't proven to sufficiency, why there are analytical gaps, why there are logical jumps which exist there, and that's problematic for your conception of the case. The reason why you do that strategically is because I think my positive material is already sufficiently strong enough to win us the debate. I'm going to close off any of the possible winning conditions a negative team might have. So it's like, maybe the adjudicator believes this, I will delete it. Maybe the adjudicator could think this is kind of contentious, I will delete it. And that's how I would, deal with that kind of situation. In terms of when it comes to issues, that's often something I do when, you're kind of close. And in debates where I think I'm losing, the focus is not actually targeting the other team. The focus is doubling down on my own material, showing I have a positive, substantial contribution and being like, look, this is what we proved to you in this debate. And maybe internally you're like, oh, they're losing. But the only thing you can plausibly change is how the adjudicator weighs the kind of material in that debate. So if you have something, perhaps it is a small impact, but maybe it's quite concrete. You can go, yes, this is small, and yes, this is concrete, but we do prove this. Compared this to the negative team, which is far more speculative, explain to me why they're more speculative. But broadly speaking, the whole approach focuses on what we have proven, why it's important, and why it should win the debate. So that's kind of not like a thing you should do in every single debate. It's an approach to strategy as to how you want to orientate your replies to deal with kind of the situation you are in. And that also actually means a few things, which is that you often can't tell how a debate is going to go until you get to the third speakers, which means when you write a reply, you should not be writing a reply as soon as you finish your first speaker's speech. You should be watching the debate, you should be taking detailed notes, and realistically, you should be writing it in the last speaker, which speaks before you. And so I know I've already said that, first speakers often give replies. Why would second speakers give replies, given that this is actually a pretty common norm? Do we know what the general vibe is? Why do second speakers give replies? Besides maybe the second speaker's better at them, they should therefore give it. Thoughts?
Large egos.
Yeah, true. So true.
The reason why in India second speakers give replies, generally second speaker is the power position in India,
Yeah.
so the entire speakers generally go second. So
Yeah.
Indian meter is second speakers go reply.
Yeah, so I think that is pretty common in the Asian circuit, and correct me if I'm wrong. I was looking at Jordan earlier today, and she's very much people should be speaking second in reply. And I think the advice is sound to an extent, and fantastic second in reply is she says first speakers are too attached to their case, which is to say they're like, oh, I ran this one argument the last 2 minutes of my speech, no one responded, I'm going to bring it back in reply and try to win a debate with it. And often it's just like, well, maybe it's unimportant, that's why no one responded to it. It wasn't winning a debate anyway, who cares? And that sort of loyalty to the case is one, unstrategic, and two, often endemic to first speakers who become quite attached to their own cases. Whereas if you're going second in reply, often you have a better vantage point, the debate kind of changes. It often means that you can kind of situate yourself within how different things have happened, etc. And that's why she likes second in reply. I think both are legitimate, both obviously have the pitfalls, which is, I think in second, you often get stuck in the weeds, you can't really see the bigger picture because you're so busy being like, I'm going to own the first half and second half. And by the time you do so, you think all the material is bad, but maybe some of the material is actually quite good. And you want that kind of step back and go, no, that material is quite good. I need to deal with it effectively in reply if my speakers don't do so beforehand. So there are things which are useful in both sides, but it really is up to what a team wants to do and a decision which is you should be making as a team. All right, so what skills do you have when you do reply? Well, the first thing here is you obviously need to do things like prioritization. You only have 4 minutes. You can't deal with every single issue which comes up in a debate, which therefore means pick the most important ones. The second one is weighing, which is you clearly have to compare your harms and benefits to other teams and give me reasons as to why your ones are more important, and I'll also show you an example of how you kind of defeat other teams' weighing and deal with that deal with that sort of issue. And the last thing here is that you should be impacting. Explain why the issues your team wins is the most decisive and the most important. So if you have a little checklist of making sure your reply does things in debates, these are the 3 things. I think they're all kind of the same thing, but I guess they've got different functions as well. All right, so here's some worked examples. So this is one of my replies from online Australs 2020, and what I've done is I've annotated it with what each part of the reply seeks to do. So the first section here is a brief overview to just explain to the adjudicator what I've done in this, what we have proven in this debate. So the motion is that we support a permanent move to online education. So I go, now explain why quality is the most important issue and how we win. We tell you 5 things. First, you get worse engagement. Second, you get worse social life. Third, you get a lack of practical hands-on experience. Fourth, your privacy gets invaded by online proctoring. And fifth, there is reduced funding for research because universities levy less student fees. See, this is 5 mechanisms. This is very concisely given. I can probably give that in around 20 seconds. You don't want to go through all the explanations, all the characterization, that's already done. So when you summarize your claims, it has to be quick, it has to be done in the least words possible. And then I deal with what the other team has said. A virtuous only response to say this is so privileged and you can just simulate things. And in that debate, honestly, it was the only response to it. So already from that kind of perspective, you should probably understand as an adjudicator that AF was losing this debate. But the third thing and the most important thing is what we've highlighted in red, which is what I would say is a meta-debate explanation as to why we get over in this debate. The first thing is explaining this one response is just mitigation. And the second is actually doing the trade-off, which is this is silly because education quality is important if you wanted people to have the incentive to go to university in the first place. The reason why you ought make the trade-off is because access is contingent upon quality. If people do not see university degrees as important, they do not see it as a worthwhile venture. It doesn't matter if everyone can go to university, if they don't want to go to in the first place because it's a shithole experience. So that obviously explains how we explain why access, which is important, is actually nominally less important because it deals with an issue which comes before it, which is to say, do people even want to go to university in the first place? If we prove that it doesn't seem like a good experience, it's bad, then clearly we win because they cannot claim that benefit. So see how that analysis here it's not responsive, it isn't new material, it's just explaining why our issue is more important than the stuff you can do in a reply. And so I think this structure is a very simple and easy to mimic sort of structure. The next reply I'll show you is a little bit harder to mimic. So this, I think what you would say is like more textbook, essentially. This reply comes from Nick G in UNSW Pre-Australs Grand Final, and the motion is on that the police should be able to access private DNA company databases such as 23andMe to solve crimes. And this is the neg reply, and I've annotated it where I've explained the summary of the team's argument, the explanation of sufficient logical coherency, and every time he makes a mean joke. So he goes, here we go. We tell you on principle that it is an unjustifiable infringement on individuals' privacy and liberty. What are they responses to the principle? Jacob tells us people have a revealed preference that people don't care about their information being used that way. Clearly, he listened to the argument I made this morning, but didn't really understand it. Revealed preferences don't constitute consent. Revealed preferences give us information about what you might want, but the standard by which we should take away your privacy should be actual consent. So the thing I'll flag here is this isn't rebuttal, this is actually dealing with the weighing metrics the other team has given and responding to why the weighing metrics are insufficient. Because AF says, well, if I basically say I'm okay with you violating my privacy, then you can violate my privacy. He goes, no, that is not the standard by which you make these decisions. We actually need people to know this data is being used in X way, and that's why you cannot permit it. So this is not a response, it's actually engaging with weighing. The second thing he says, the second response we get is an emotional appeal to the severity of these crimes. One, this is very contingent about the characterization you believe about what these crimes are. Second, as Kendall notes, you don't currently apply a principle that notes the more severe the crime, the more people we're willing to fuck over on our fight to justice. Like, that's Batman, that's not the police. So once again here, this is the claim from ACT where they go, well, if you want to catch a murderer, of course we can do like many breaches in privacy because it's just such a bad crime. He says, well, no, that is not how you make decisions in the criminal justice system. So once again, that is dealing with weighing metrics that our team is giving. The last thing he says is, the last thing we hear is you can do it anyway. And that is Ben's Hail Mary from 3A. Just because your name is Ben Jackson, the things that come out of your mouth aren't always good and sometimes they're dumb. You can't arrest people on spurious drawings of black people. You need actually probative evidence. The problem in this debate is you can arrest people on really spurious fucking evidence, and that's DNA. So I will firstly encourage you not to be this mean in debates to people, and this is just obviously because people know each other and they can make fun of each other. Don't necessarily do this. But the second thing here is that once again, you can see that he's responding to, he's explaining what his arguments do not stand and giving you these weighing metrics and explaining what the difference in this debate is, so what is different between both worlds. So the thing I want to say here is often in debates when both teams choose a way, right? Maybe AF goes, this impact hurts people who are vulnerable, the impact to these vulnerable people is very intense, and Ned goes, but no, our scope of benefit is far larger. The problem here is these two are contested weighing metrics. Both of them can plausibly be true and plausibly be persuasive to your average ordinary person. Often the thing at your reply is you need to explain why your weighing metrics should win, and what Nick does very well here is that he goes through every single weighing metric the other team gives, and then gives a response as to why it does not stand in a kind of why it does not stand. That I think is a very effective reply. And also just like stylistically, if you watch this in person and it gets how those things, like you have a laugh, you think it's persuasive, it's funny. So that's also, once again, I think the use of humor in many instances is particularly effective in driving home a point. So does this make sense? Oh, right, okay, so that's two worked examples. I think the first one, far more easy to replicate. This one, I think, is you have to be very, very specific, because in a speech, if you watch the whole debate, far more content is covered. He picks the three most important things and deals with the three most important things. And that is a skill in and of itself, identifying what is the things which are actually dangerous and what are the things which you can just ignore and it won't hurt your case. All right, so what are some reply speech sins? The first one is being boring, which is simply re-explaining what has already been said in debate. If you re-explain things, you haven't added anything, like, I don't know why I'm there. Don't do that. The second thing is being an overachiever, trying to do too much in a debate, and that's covering everything. Like, there are some people who give me 4 issues in a debate. I'm pretty sure Toomey did it once. At one time, we debated with each other at Mac Mini. It's bad. Don't do it. Focus on like 2 issues. The third thing here is don't be a dog, which is introducing new substantive material in replies. And this is a trend which has been happening recently, which is people have been like sneaking in rebuttals or doing rebuttals completely with replies. So there's 2 observations here. Firstly, don't do that. You're not allowed. Like, if you do so, I will literally give you a 70 because you have not added a contribution I can credit in debate. The second thing here is, as a judge, when people do so, you should also whack them in the speaks and punish them for doing this, because the reason why it happens is people win debates because of it. Here's an example of when this happened in round 7 of Australs, when some guy goes, panel, I noticed this new responses at reply, but God was a new material at 3A stupid. Also, if you're going to do new responses, don't flag you're doing new responses. Like, anyway, yeah. And the last thing here is having a loser attitude, which is self-deprecation and assuming you've always lost. And one of the advice I got when I was young was the reason why some people are good at replies is they always think they won the debate and they can always see a pathway as they win the debate, and that kind of confidence reflects in the replies in many instances. And look, sometimes overconfidence is bad because it often means you're blinkered to actually good material from the other team, but you do need that confidence to a large extent. And this is a kind of funny example from 2018 as well, where they go, Speaker, I know we lost this debate, so this reply will explain why we only lost by a small margin. And it's like, yeah, he gets a 39.5 and a 40, but his teammates get binned. So in the kind of spirit of teamwork, that is a bad reply, and you shouldn't really do that either. So don't do these things, they're cringe. But yeah, so in terms of like strategy and what you can do in reply, here are some like kind of dirty tricks, because replies on a whole are a bit dishonorable because you really can't analytically beat a claim, or you can't even add new rebuttal in any instance. So what can you actually do to get ahead, which is a little bit dirty? The first thing here is, I know ironically I said sneaking in new responses. There's a few ways in which you can do that. The first of which is that you can pretend an earlier speaker said it. So I just go, at second, we told you. They did not say at second, but I'm going to say so anyway. The second thing is give a response, but make it seem like a reasonable and logical intuition that any ordinary person would have. And I think this example from Ollie in Nepal is like just fantastic. We're going to say, they have a debate about like whether we should have the women's league at the same time as the men's league, or we should do it in different seasons. And they make an argument just being about in the off season, women are able to kind of find other work. And doesn't really get litigated, gets one response at third neg, and he tries to win on this issue. So what does he say? He goes, the only response we get at third negative is why will women get these opportunities? As if we had to provide analytical proof as to why women who are experts in their field will be able to find labour performing that expertise. So, like, one, yes, he is ID polling the other team by being like, can't believe you assume women can't get jobs. And the second thing here is that this is actually just a new claim in debate, but it sounds so intuitive, where it's like, well, when we said women could get these jobs, of course you should believe it on default, because it just is so intuitively true. It is a bit of a new response, but I think incredibly effective. And like, I am suspect as to how you should adjudicate it. I think it's probably sufficiently true for you to credit it, but you can see why the line blurs a lot in these sorts of instances. The third thing here is that you can flip the onus onto the other team and explain why it's on their why it's their fault for under-explaining a claim. We just say, I'm not going to respond to you, but I'm going to be like, they don't actually prove this argument for 3 reasons. Here's why they need to prove it to claim this impacts. So what you're doing is saying, calling them out as opposed to actually responding to it yourself. So those are 3 ways into which you can kind of sneak in your responses. But on a whole, the thing is, most people are pretty bad at it. I don't really recommend it. You shouldn't really do it. The second kind of piece of advice is abusing neg block. So neg block is an incredibly powerful tool in Australs because you just get 12 minutes of free time, basically, right? So if you're losing after third affirmative, you can pick one win condition and hammer it in for 12 minutes straight. So maybe there are 3 kind of issues in this debate. We've lost 2 of them. One, maybe we have some degree of standing. I pick that one and I go at it for 12 minutes straight. And once a judge listens to something for 12 minutes, they actually often just do get gaslit into believing maybe this is the most important thing in debate. So that's also like a thing you can do. And obviously when you're doing neg block, you should alter the kind of material which goes into each speech. We'll just say, I think if you have a reply, third neg can spend more time on rebuttal and wiping out as many arguments as possible. They can spend less time on weighing and impacting. On neg reply, obviously I can do it and weighing and impacting work. On the other hand, I think 3A might actually still need to do a bit of work in terms of just impacting, in terms of weighing to defend against neg block, which comes before you, but at 3N, you can really just do a bunch of rebuttal as like the last person who speaks before reply cleans things up. And the last thing is, here's how you can kind of seem persuasive and kind of seem super reasonable, because seeming sensible is actually just a quality which makes you more persuasive. And that's making relative assessments of the persuasiveness of the opposing team. Because speakers who often seem uncharitable, who are just like, every single claim is so freaking stupid, like it sucked, it's so dumb, look really unpersuasive. It looks quite bad, especially if the judge finds the material to be quite good, which is why often if you can make a relative distinction between claims you thought were good and claims you were bad, it allows you to be a bit of a dick by saying this claim is silly, but if you go, the better claim is X, and then you deal with that, you come up being a bit more reasonable. So you can still be a bit of a dick, but you don't seem as bad, just kind of drilling into a team like that. So this is on reply strategy, and on the last slide, I have a bunch of replies, which I think are all quite good from a diverse range of speakers. So I would recommend watching, so the thing here is that watching a reply itself isn't actually that useful. You often have to watch the entire debate to do so. So all these debates I picked are also very high quality and very enjoyable debates to watch. So I recommend you watch the whole debate. And in terms of how you can find utility in this is, obviously you should like write notes during debates. But the second thing that I think could be quite useful, if you're going to watch a whole debate anyway, you could just try giving a reply after one of the teams and then watching the reply which happens after you and seeing what that speaker did differently, so you can kind of, look, cover, and then check. And that could be a way as to understanding how some of these speakers think as well. A brief overview in terms of like what I think is particularly useful and what is particularly illustrative. Elle Jones's reply up there is fantastic in just like, I think a textbook, very good reply, very clean, very intelligent. And I think actually quite easy to replicate. I think people like Aaron Tournier-Aiden and James Stratton also very textbook replies, which are very, very good. Kevin Lee, very technically proficient. I think he very much explains why things logically do not make sense in a way which is very convincing. People like Jordan and Brendan and Ollie, they have some dark magic, which I don't quite understand in many instances, but they just are incredibly persuasive. And I think the reason for it is actually just, I think in replies, they don't necessarily appeal to just your judge, they appeal to your every ordinary person. Like if my mum heard a Jordan Gibson reply, she'd probably believe her. And that's kind of the sort of quality which I think is particularly useful. And like I would contrast it with, say, Dom Grenade and Kevin Lees of the world, who very much are very technical. They win debates to a judge and a debating judge, and are very effective at doing so. So here is like a very diverse set. And I guess like up to you whether you guys want to watch it. Oh yeah, Shorty's reply seminar is also very good. So what he does in that seminar, which I think is very interesting, is he goes through an entire debate and writes a reply for you in it. So you can basically see exactly how he thinks. And it's probably a more in-depth approach to writing a reply with an actual work example from a debate, as opposed to what were like kind of anecdotes that are given you to kind of illustrate to you what a good reply kind of looks like. But yeah, so that's it. Do we have any questions? Any questions? Yep.
Did your introduction on the 7 out of 7 days?
Oh, we won by 1 point.
Who was the judge?
Sean Lee.
Ah.
Yeah. But yeah. Anything else? Cool, no questions. Alright then, awesome.